Okay, Ramblers, let's get ramblin'. In the mid-90s, there were few directors more exciting than Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, guys who clawed their ways into the movie business by sheer determination and talent. They wore their love for cinema on their sleeves, and made no bones about it. They helped kickstart a wave of movie nerds, who'd be calling their own shots and making millions for the studio system. Suddenly, it seemed like being able to endlessly quote Martin Scorsese or John Carpenter movies meant you might get a shot at sitting in the director's chair. Naturally, the two gravitated towards one another, and to this day, their collaborations are eagerly looked forward to by cinephiles of all stripes. But their most famous collaboration might be one of their first. The duo teamed up in 1995 to make what's now thought of as one of the quintessential modern vampire movies. More than that, it's a genre-defying blast filled with splendid dialogue, eye-popping gore, and of course, plenty of references to movies past. We're talking about From Dusk Till Dawn, and we're going to find out what the f*** happened to this horror comedy classic.
I don't want to hear anything about I don't believe in vampires, because I don't f***ing believe in vampires. What I believe in my own two eyes, and what I saw is f***ing vampires.
While we think of From Dusk Till Dawn as being pure Tarantino and Rodriguez, it actually originated with one Robert Kurtzman. In the 80s and 90s, Kurtzman was one-third of the talented makeup company K&B Effects, alongside Howard Berger and Greg Nicotero. Obviously, everyone knows who these guys are now, but 30 years ago, they were plugging away on just about every movie that they could get their hands on. Kurtzman had conceived the basic idea of From Dusk Till Dawn in an effort to create a project that would truly show off K&B's skills as an effects house, with the idea being he would eventually direct it. The original screenwriter, John Esposito, had left the project to pen the film adaptation of Graveyard Shift, so Kurtzman needed a writer to flesh out his 24-page outline. A producer friend recommended a young video store clerk named Quentin Tarantino, who at the time was furiously writing scripts that he would send to anyone who'd read them. Kurtzman and company read Natural Born Killers and True Romance, and decided that Quentin was the right man for their crazy vampire thriller. Offering him a measly $1,500 to write the script, the crew was able to convince Quentin to pen the screenplay, but he had one condition. They would eventually do the makeup free of charge for his directorial debut, Reservoir Dogs. The deal was struck, and K&B would go on to create the disturbing missing ear effect in Tarantino's now classic debut. After Tarantino finished the script, there was a whole lot of waiting to be done. Though the writer's profile was rising in the early 90s, the money just wasn't coming in for their movie, despite the fact that K&B initially envisioned it as a very modestly budgeted film in the $1 to $2 million range. At a certain point, it looked as though it was going to be greenlit as a Tales from the Crypt Presents after the modest success of Demon Knight. But that plan eventually fell through. The film's fortunes changed not long after Pulp Fiction became a cultural touchstone in the fall of 1994. Tarantino was now a household name and had a bit more clout than he did in the years prior. At the same time, a young director from Mexico named Robert Rodriguez had captured the industry's attention with his DIY western, El Mariachi, and its impending follow-up, Desperado. Tarantino and Rodriguez had become familiar with each other on the film festival circuit in 1992, and again soon after when they were both spending time at Columbia Pictures, which is where Pulp Fiction was initially set up and where Rodriguez made Desperado. The two got to talking one day about how cool it was for Rodriguez to run rampant in Mexico, shooting whatever he wanted, however he wanted. When Tarantino mentioned that he'd once written a script set in the country, Rodriguez read the script for From Dusk Till Dawn and immediately saw the potential for a balls-to-the-wall action horror flick. After some time passed, Tarantino made clear to his bosses at Miramax, the brothers Weinstein, that he wanted to make Dusk next, with the caveat that he didn't want to direct it. He'd leave that to Rodriguez. whose inventive style he thought was perfect for the project. Miramax agreed, and suddenly the low-budget vampire movie with a $1 million budget now had $17 million to play with. Kurtzman and his compadres would stay on as the lead effects team. According to Rodriguez, it all happened very fast, which is how they wanted it. They were going to be shooting in the summer of '95 with an eye towards releasing it that Halloween. An insane schedule, but one they were intent on, until it became apparent that some of the actors that they wanted were not going to be available with that timeline. In the meantime, Tarantino went back to the script with some of Rodriguez's notes and rewrote it substantially to bring more depth to the lead characters, who he felt he'd written as cliches in his initial drafts. Casting on the film would of course be critical. It was apparently Rodriguez's idea that Tarantino play the psychotic Richie Gecko, which appealed to the side of the writer who always envisioned himself as an actor. Tarantino went to his old pal Harvey Keitel, who'd starred in his previous 2 films, to star as conflicted preacher Jacob. According to Quentin, Keitel wasn't sure the second half twist was going to work, but the writer was steadfast that even though the genre changes, the characters were going to stay the same. He argued that they were going to be just as shocked as the audience at the sudden appearance of vampires, and would have to deal with the surprise as best they could in the moment. Juliette Lewis, who'd starred in Oliver Stone's adaptation of Tarantino's Natural Born Killers script, received the Dusk screenplay from her agents and was immediately interested. This caused him to go back to the script once again to make her character even better. Casting Richie's cool-as-a-cucumber brother Seth was not as easy. Tarantino collaborators like John Travolta, Michael Madsen, and Christopher Walken were all offered the part, but declined it for one reason or another. One day Rodriguez saw George Clooney on the cover of Us magazine. He lifted it up and said, "How about this guy?" Tarantino, of course, knew Clooney professionally, having directed an episode of ER just 1 year prior, and he thought that the TV actor had the chops to break through on the big screen. Tarantino even thought that he and Clooney looked somewhat alike, a notion that Clooney found, let's just say, amusing later on. Incidentally, Seth's signature tattoo was Clooney's idea. He was inspired by the ink worn by the protagonists in the New Zealand domestic drama Once Were Warriors. There were many important supporting roles to fill as well, with some opportunities to bring to the forefront a handful of character actors that Tarantino and Rodriguez had long cherished, which led to the casting of blaxploitation legend Fred the Hammer Williamson and makeup effects great Tom Savini, who had met Tarantino years earlier at a horror convention. Not only that, but Savini was a mentor to the K&B guys, so he fit in quite naturally. Once he was cast, Rodriguez said that they wrote even more material for the character of Sex Machine because they just couldn't get enough of Savini. For the small yet memorable role of vampire priestess Santanico Pandemonium, named after a Mexican horror movie from the 70s, Rodriguez brought on his desperado actress Salma Hayek. Problem was, Hayek was deathly afraid of snakes, and the role required the vampire to sexily dance with a very large python. Hayek actually had to go to therapy for a few weeks prior in order to get over her fear. Add to that her dance had no choreography, Rodriguez encouraged her to simply move with the music on set. Naturally, Hayek nailed the moment, creating one of the more infamous character introductions of the 90s. Another Desperado alum was brought in for not 1, but 3 roles. Comedy great and stoner god Cheech Marin. Depending on your source, Marin was either always meant to play 3 different parts in the movie, or just 2. Rumor has it that Eric Estrada was meant to play Carlos, the gangster who rendezvous with Seth at the end of the picture, but for whatever reason, he couldn't do it. Ultimately, Marin appears in 3 different roles, and is seen as an homage to low-budget movies of the past, where actors would play multiple parts out of necessity. Shooting on the film was not always easy. One of the first scenes shot was the Gecko brothers leaving the convenience store as it explodes. No CGI involved. They were blowing up an actual set that they built, hence they had to get it right in 1 take. Sadly, a camera malfunction ruined the take, forcing them to rebuild the set and reshoot the sequence at the tail end of the production. Much of the first act of the film was shot early on, followed by the horror sequences within the titty twister, which went on for approximately 5 weeks. Naturally, K&B had their work cut out for them, creating dozens upon dozens of vampire makeups. When the entire bar is filled with fully transformed vampires at the end, K&B only created 6 monster costumes, which were used over and over again during the final battle. Long hours led to long days, and Rodriguez was shooting so much footage that he thought he was going to have a 2.5-hour movie on his hands. That said, according to his producer and then wife, Elizabeth Avalon, they had no interference from Miramax on the picture. The studio was content to let the filmmakers do whatever they wanted, and rarely checked in on them. One thing the filmmakers apparently weren't worried about was the MPAA. In an interview with Fangoria on the set of the film, Tarantino boasted that he had a good relationship with them, hence he wasn't concerned that they had to cut much out. As it turned out, the MPAA didn't have a ton of notes for Dusk, save for one curious complaint. After John Hawk's unlucky store clerk Pete gets set ablaze and shot, he falls dead in a heap of popcorn kernels, his legs writhing while he finally dies. The MPAA disliked that you could see Pete's legs twitching as he died, and wanted the shot toned down or cut. Rodriguez later marveled that this minor moment was more controversial for the ratings board than anything in the film's gory second half. Though Tarantino was confident about the film ultimately receiving an R rating, Rodriguez was preparing for something highly unusual in the event that the film got slapped with an NC-17. The director was considering releasing 2 versions of the film in theaters, one rated R, the other unrated. Obviously, this never came to pass, nor did a 2.5-hour version of the film. Cutting the movie proved to be a challenge because post-production couldn't commence until filming wrapped. That's because Rodriguez was also the film's editor. So, whereas an editor is often already assembling a rough cut while cameras are still rolling, Dusk had no choice but to wait until Rodriguez was ready to sit at the edit bay. That meant a post-production schedule of 2 or 3 months shrunk down to a few weeks if Dusk was going to meet its proposed release date of December 22nd. Turns out that date was not meant to be. And not just because it would have been an awfully weird Christmas season release. Miramax pushed it back to January 19th, 1996, adding a little bit of breathing room, though it was still a very tight squeeze, considering production had wrapped just that August. Rodriguez got it done though, and that's even more impressive considering he also had to do press for the theatrical release of Desperado. When From Dusk Till Dawn was released, it opened at the #1 spot with $10 million, with a decent $5,000 per theater average. However, it dropped over 50% the next weekend, and 50% the weekend after that. Ultimately, it ended its domestic run with little more than $25 million. Not exactly a smash hit. That said, we know now that the movie made quite an impression. It did very well on the home video market, prompting Miramax to make 2 direct-to-DVD sequels, both released in 1999. And in 2014, Robert Rodriguez unleashed From Dusk Till Dawn, the series, which started life as a remake of the first film, and ended up lasting 3 seasons total on Rodriguez's El Rey network. Is there still blood in the brand? As of this writing, nothing is set in stone. But it's hard to imagine that we won't make another trip to the titty twister in the not too distant future. Because I hear they put on a hell of a show there.
Hi folks, Greg here, and welcome to my horror party.
Sammy, open the window!
Never! I knew it! I am not! So where are you? The flying nun?
We're kicking off the new year by breaking with tradition. That is, we're gonna party with a more mainstream horror selection, 1987's The Lost Boys.
Get yourself a good sharp steak. Drive it right through his heart.
I can't do that. He's my brother.
Okay, we'll come over and do it for you.
No!
But there's a method to my madness here. One of my qualifications for a good party movie is its repeatability, and this one definitely fills that bill. So if you're one of the legions of fans who know every frame of this movie by heart, then this is the episode for you.
You're eating maggots. How do they taste?
I'm also going to show you how to make a bloody good cocktail that's a perfect match for a fun vampire flick. But first, let's break it down.
90s Carpenter gets slept on more than it should. Yeah, it's not the powerhouse of his 80s run, but even his second-tier filmography is still superior to a hefty amount of genre directors today. But that's a different argument for a different day. One flick in particular that never got the love it always should is his last great entry of the 90s and, well, of his career. An edgy, ever so slightly satirical vampire story that just may be the closest thing to an actual Western Carpenter got to make. So same rules as always, grab a drink, maybe an edible. For the children at home, let's mind our language.
Excuse me. Language.
And explore the always entertaining vampires. Word on the street has it that Carpenter had become overly cynical about the film industry, and after the negative reaction to his only sequel, Escape from LA, it seems like he might have been done for good. Now, let's be honest, Carpenter being cynical isn't new, and a big reason why I've always respected the man. He had clearly seen the bullshit and isn't the type to waste his time.
I don't need this anymore. And, fine. Eli Roth and his Hollywood hair, let him rule now. Darren Aronofsky, secretly I think hates horror films. Let the geniuses go.
But along came the script and book for Vampires, which the rights to had been sitting with Largo Entertainment, and both which Carpenter liked. So he figured he could make this story work while many others couldn't, and thus gave him a bit of hope. Leaning into the Western themes and setting, he ended the 90s by giving us John Carpenter's Vampires. The 90s were going through a vampire boom, with more classic showings like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Interview with the Vampire, and more monstrous interpretations like From Dusk Till Dawn and Blade. Now, real quick, I should say that the Subspecies trilogy, yes, it ended at part 3 for me, also did this mix, but leaned more towards the creature look with the classic castle setting. Carpenter decided to go with a slightly more vintage look mixed with a monstrous ferocity. Having these creatures of the night be tied to the Catholic Church keeps it a little more old school, but aims to update them in a way that would be more sensible to modern audiences.
Garlic? You want to try garlic? You stand there with garlic around your neck. One of these buggers will bend you fucking over and take a walk up your Strata Chocolata while he's sucking the blood out of your neck, alright?
Thomas Ian Griffith as Valak perfectly encapsulates this. The vampire look is heavily influenced by the romantic leanings of the past, but has the intensity of the newer, at the time, incarnations. I mean, his punch reverse chop literally cuts Mark Boone Jr. in half. It shows respect for what came before, yet tweaking things here and there for a more edgy approach that pretty much always works. And a small detail like having the Master sleep underground as a safety measure gives us maybe one of the coolest awakening scenes. It's Carpenter showing us how to be cool with a simple yet masterfully executed idea. Aiming to make the lead character, in Carpenter's words, to be as savage as the prey he's going after, we get a career-high performance from James Woods, playing against type at the time, and honestly he is both exaggerated, low-key, and always on. Sure, the 90s version of being badass comes off a bit silly now, yet James Woods still commands every scene with an anger and overall apathy towards everyone, and it works wonders.
If you got something else to say, spit it the fuck out!
Sporting a leather jacket in the New Mexico heat, dark shades and slim cigars, like Neo in the Matrix, it's not something that will always be fashionably cool, but goddamn is he not one of the best and most humorous characters in Carpenter's filmography. Fighting with his co-workers, walking away from explosions, and taunting Valak as he's about to be burned on the cross. I mean, I could make an entire video of just Jack Crow quotes.
Huh? You get a little mahogany from that, a little ebony? Come on, tell the truth. Shut the fuck up. This was your fight, Cardinal. Now it is mine. You're not starting to fall for this half-dead old.
How's it look?
Like another New Mexican shithole.
And it should be noted that Carpenter let Woods try his lines 2 ways. As written, and then with some improvised quips. And he kept most of the improvised ones.
I was kicking your ass back there. Did that give you wood?
Daniel Baldwin, also written as Grumpy with a chip on his shoulder, plays Montoya. Crow's right-hand man who bonds with their captive Katrina after being bitten. And this may not be the most intricate character, but, like Woods, fits this gray area where he's both despicable and very entertaining. They both play off each other well, and though Vampires makes no effort to make them likable, and quick side note, good, not everybody needs to be a saint, their friendship and professional attitude of doing what must be done adds some nice narrative stakes. And also, one of the best scenes with Montoya is when he's checking into the hotel to hunker down and wait for Crow. We get this gem of a line.
Is that your girlfriend?
No, it's my fucking mother. Give me the key.
I mean, to be honest with you, I kind of want this as my outgoing voicemail.
No, it's my fucking mother. Give me the key.
Now, I tend to agree with the masses that Cheryl Lee's Katrina should have had a beefier part. I mean, you got Laura fucking Palmer, but with the limited role, she owns it the best she can, and let me say here, her acting level to emote and relay information just with a stare is unmatched. I mean, she has these striking eyes that can tell an entire story. One could argue Carpenter has been making Western-influenced movies for most of his career, but Vampires was the first time it's clear that this was his starting point. We are watching a Western vampire tale unfold. We have the sweeping shots of the Southwest, sun-drenched cinematography. There's this filter used somewhat frequently that has a pink hue at the top that is just beautiful and sets the perfect visual tone. Carpenter, known to shoot in scope, always has a wide and gorgeous looking frame, and that still holds true here. His low-key score and the ending at the abandoned town. Vampires lets Carpenter finally scratch that lifelong itch. The concept of a first vampire is a cool idea, and using the church's method of an exorcism gone wrong as the origin of it is quite clever. Now, Carpenter did help rewrite the script, though he doesn't get writing credit. So to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what's from him and what was from earlier drafts, but either way, setting a Western around the origin of vampires mixes as well as rye whiskey and sweet vermouth. And for the non-whiskey drinkers here, that means it mixes perfectly. Something as simple as a blues-laden music cue, or Montoya carjacks legendary Frank Darabont, that just has that sort of sweaty Western feel. Or, of course, that great shot of the team walking towards the nest, a thing of beauty. There seems to be a general consensus that Vampires peaks at the Motel Massacre. Also, a nice touch calling it the Sun God Motel. I don't necessarily agree. I think it's kind of a cheap out for folks not really into the story at hand. Though I will admit that starting off with that intense and wild opening 20 minutes may not have been the best pacing-wise, as Vampires ends up being more of a slow burn procedural about the inner workings of vampire hunters and what happens when they finally meet their match. What comes after the Nest and Motel Massacre scenes are still great stuff, but they do fail to have that sort of wham-bam adrenaline impact. And it doesn't help that we start off with a ragtag group of hunters using a unique method to rid vampire nests only to immediately kill them all off. I mean, let's be fair, that's like an entire movie on its own, and starting off with it kind of hurts what comes after. Now, I don't believe the story of the first vampire looking for a Black Cross artifact being hunted by Woods and Baldwin isn't great on its own. But in terms of style and pacing, it is a bit of a bait and switch, and I think this is a leading cause of hesitation and somewhat negative reviews. And it also doesn't help that we underutilize two of the Colombian gang members from Predator 2, Long Live El Scorpio, and Shang Tsung himself. Why put Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa in a movie and then not use him? But I think one needs to view the movie on the whole story that is being told. And though it's more methodical in its development, still kicks ass with a few gory set pieces, and of course, James Woods chewing the scenery.
Give me the cross.
Let me just ask you one thing. After 600 years, how's that dick working? Pretty good?
Now, let's go with some best scenes. That opening hunt where they drag each vampire outside is brilliant. It may be a tad convoluted and impractical, but watching each one scream to death as the flare visual bursts from their inside is Carpenter being cool as one can be. The Motel Massacre. The drinking, hookers, and overall party vibe. I mean, I really don't understand you could watch a scene and not absolutely love it. And to me, it's good to see everybody so damn happy. It's kind of weird viewing it, though, in modern times, because I immediately think, Who's gonna be pissed at this now? But you know what? It's fun, schlocky, and lets you know that after a hard day's work, these guys need to wind down. And also like to invest in the local economy. I mean, I don't know, job savers, if you ask me. The cleanup scene where Crow goes back to, tie up loose ends. And of course, the invasion at the monastery. In the end, I get that this isn't ranking at the top of any Carpenter lists. And that's fine. A small-scale vampire flick with an anti-hero late into the man's career, it just didn't pop as much as I would have hoped. The gore is great, with Greg Nicotero being a part of the effects team, a solid score by the director himself, a capable villain with Thomas Ian Griffith as Valak, and a shit ton of great dialogue. John Carpenter's Vampires is an underrated entry in the director's filmography. And if you could find a way to view it as its own single story, there's a great time to be had. So leave your sensitivities at the door and enjoy this cool and slightly campy ride back to the late 90s.
One of the greatest dreams I ever had was about me and Tom Hardy. No, not like that. It's not about to get X-rated or anything, but maybe mildly hot in my opinion. Anyway, so it's me and Tom Hardy. I have like this kick-ass leather jacket on, rocking a ponytail, and a stake in my right hand. Tom, who's a vampire in this dream, says, "Who are you?" Not attempting the accent. And I'm like, "The Slayer." Then he replies, "What's that?" Then I ever so confidently say, "You're about to find out." Top 10 female characters I wish I could be, and Buffy ranks way high up there. While my love starts the movie by the same name from 1991, we've got to play tribute to the one little show that we all miss, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I remember the first time I ever saw Buffy. I was over at my mom's boyfriend's house and I felt really socially awkward. Eventually, I found my way over to a spot on the ground next to the couch. There were commercials on the TV, probably for like 1-800-COLLECT or something.
1-800-COLLECT saves at least a buck or two.
Pity the fool who don't use 1-800-COLLECT.
And then the show comes on. It's dark in all the right ways visually. A girl is running across a graveyard. She has a stake. It's Buffy. Or what I will come to know is Buffy. For the last 15 minutes or so of the episode, I totally forgot that I felt awkward. This is where it all began. So thanks. I even wrote a blog post in 2008 about the defunct animated series. But let's move on to the backstory. Joss Whedon started Buffy as Rhonda the Immortal Waitress, which seems more like a skit rather than a legit show.
I want to thank you guys for watching horror TV shows we miss, and ask if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
Guess he realized that too, because the idea then evolved into the tale of a teenage girl who was chosen to fight the forces of darkness. Whedon wanted to flip the idea that there's always this blonde girl who gets stuck in an alley with no way out, who always winds up getting murdered in horror movies. Remember the girl power movement of the 90s? Yeah, it's like that but different. Whedon wanted that blonde girl to be the hero and possibly inspire other ladies along the way. He also realizes somewhere along the timeline that he was writing about himself, a character who is overlooked but somehow becomes important. Sometimes we live long enough to see ourselves become the villain. Circling back to the movie, the script Joss wrote was sold to Dolly Parton's production company, Sandollar. The company then moved ahead with making a feature film starring Luke Perry and Christy Swanson. The director, Frank Kazooie, said that it was a pop culture take on what folks thought about vampires, which is a tiny bit there. Whedon did not agree with this vision at all and thought they took away the main idea of an empowered woman kicking ass out of the spotlight. I don't see that, and I've seen the movie like a billion times. I see a teenager who is really annoyed that she has to save the world from vampires and doesn't understand why anyone else can't do it. The movie still shows that balance between being in that spot as a teen where you're getting closer to adulthood and the dream of going to the dance with Luke Perry, because that's important. Sure, it has its corny moments, but the show did too, but we aren't here for a side-by-side analysis. Years after the initial burn, Gail Berman, who was the executive producer of Sandollar, asked Whedon if he wanted to resurrect Buffy as a television series. Whedon pitched High School as a horror movie, and then off they went, because it kinda is. The series started with the working title of Slayer, with a 25-minute plot that was pitched to the WB. The WB. And they snagged, and the rest is history, just like the network itself. Also, by the way, if you want to watch that pilot, it is on YouTube. So what is it that we love about Buffy? There were so many things to love about it as a series. When you look back on it, you can feel the nostalgia pings, especially when you bring up the WB lineup from 1998. Cue the Faces promo. Coming home after school, grabbing a Surge and some Dunkaroos. If I'm lucky, we're having spaghetti for dinner, and after I get to watch Buffy, then stay up until 2 a.m. watching MTV. Oh, and then hope that my mom doesn't come in my room after bedtime and catch me on the phone. I have like 2 friends. I'm still not cool. But guess what? Buffy makes me feel like I'm cool. I want to be Buffy, or even Faith, but I'm probably closer to the Willow or the Anya. Well, I wasn't quite in high school just yet. I still felt the range of teenage highs and lows that Buffy seemed to hit so accurately. Dawson's Creek did this as well, but Buffy made the teens a tad more relatable. Sure, there were times it was a little off. I never knew anyone who was going to a cool teen club after hours that played all the great bands. I have heard of teen clubs existing, but not on that level, and I had certainly never been to one. Also, tell me if you did, because I'm genuinely curious at this point. And then let me know if there was a ton of vampires that came and you constantly reopened it for what reason, I have no idea. So, there was this whole community of fans going online to Buffy message boards to discuss the show after each airing. It was more than just a show for teens. There was so much to dissect even amongst scholars in their academic papers. Buffy studies is a thing. So is the Whedon Institute of Studies, which may or may not change their name. There was Faustian motifs, rock culture, fantasizing masculinity, philosophy of religion. There's a paper for it all. This was one of the first instances of us studying television like we would classic literature. I say all of this because while I do watch shows for straight comfort, it's also fun to have the ones that you can debate with your friends. I'm looking at you, Lost. Also, who am I if I don't bring up the Nerf Herder theme? It's so utterly perfect for the opening that I can't imagine anything else for it. Don't send me links. I won't do it. It was bad enough that I had to hear the one song over the Dawson's Creek opening. Favorite episodes? Hush. No, I'm not telling you to hush the episode. Anyway, funny. I'm going to start with a Monster of the Week episode we all remember. There's something rather bold about stopping the dialogue of a witty show about 14 minutes in. That's what it was known for. This episode is about as straight-on horror as the show gets, especially with the look of the gentleman, which Whedon describes as Nosferatu meets Hellraiser by way of the Joker. Mad props to Doug Jones, who is the master of many faces. So much unfolds in this episode as well. Season 4 is not one of the strongest, but some big moments happen here. Riley and Buffy find out what the other does when they aren't at school, which they've been avoiding like a laryngitis epidemic. Willow and Tara hold hands for the first time in a small gesture that will mean so much to its audience as the relationship grows. Hush can largely be looked at in 2 ways. The views of censorship in the media, or as Whedon intended, his gamble to see if removing the dialogue the show was so well known for would pay off. Either way, it was a massive success and was memorable for even those who weren't Buffy obsessed. Restless. This one always stuck out in my mind. It's one of the more bizarre ones, but it's also one that fans constantly dissect. Whedon said that everything in this episode was meant to be there, well, except the cheese guy.
That's it. I'm waking up.
There are some obvious pulls like Be Back Before Dawn, Spike Giles and the Demon Lone Shark and Tabula Rasa, Joyce in the Walls, Anya talking about getting back into vengeance, and a ton more. I like that this episode was more of an epilogue than a finale. The imagery and music always help take the episode over the top as well. My mind always goes back to Xander crawling through the back of the ice cream truck. There's also Willow walking through the red curtains, which is a nod to David Lynch and Twin Peaks. The whole episode kind of gives off a Twin Peaks vibe. There's the absurdity of the dialogue and the situations.
Hoodlums like you. Hoodlums, yes, I mean you and your friends, your whole sex. Throw them in the sea for all I care.
But really it's a study in character, as well as a deep look into the psyche of the Scoobs. This will always be a standout episode for me because, as you know, I wear the cheese. The cheese does not wear me. Prophecy Girl and When She Was Bad. Okay, so I discussed this episode pairing with my friend who is my Buffy life mate. I told her if you include Prophecy Girl in your favorites list, you have to put When She Was Bad with it. We agreed because you have to follow Buffy when she's in that mindset after she killed the Master, what her emotions were after dying, and how she handled them. I think most of us expected that season 2 would just move on to whatever the next adventure was, and instead addresses Buffy's trauma in the aftermath. It's much easier to push the people you love away, especially if you don't want them to get hurt. This coupled with the idea that Buffy feels like she's alone because she's the only one who can deal with whatever evil comes at them. She also has pretty severe PTSD from dying the real death. This is only rivaled later by dying in the gift and being brought back in bargaining. While When She Was Bad does get pretty low, as I said before, it's absolutely necessary that Buffy goes here. Watching her cry her eyes out as she turns the Master's bones to dust with a sledgehammer is devastating. I think both of these episodes proved that Buffy was more than it was given credit for. Also, Prophecy Girl is one of my most quoted episodes. I may be dead, but I'm pretty, which is more than I can say for you. And you have fruit punch mouth. I'm also amped every time I see the scene with Buffy, Angel, and Xander heading to the surface with the theme playing in the background. Side note, I actually still have the advert for the season 2 premiere from TV Guide with Buffy and Angel that says, "Get home before dark." The body. As someone who has lost a parent, this one is hard. From the very beginning, the feelings of losing someone as close as a parent are captured quite perfectly. Watching Buffy struggle on the phone with the dispatcher to when she shouts at Giles that you aren't supposed to move the body, it all becomes surreal. The first time I watched this episode, I was closer to Dawn's age and still had both parents, so my cares were more closely aligned with hers. The biggest heartaches in my life at that point were some girl saying something mean about me and feeling like I didn't belong. Watching it later, I feel all the things Buffy did. The gaze looks, feeling unfocused and in limbo, the constant disbelief, and having to rush quicker than normal into adulthood. The episode also has no backing score, which makes the process all that more real. Grief is also represented well by each of the characters. Xander's angry, Willow's on edge, Tara's understanding, and Anya is trying to make sense of it all. Her monologue is one of the best of the entire series, by the way.
Or brush her hair, not ever, and no one will explain to me why.
Buffy is forever changed after this episode, and you see the effects on her personality for the rest of the series. Innocence. I guess I just like being crushed because I'm coming with more of the hard hits. Innocence is one of the more heartbreaking episodes and certainly can be one of the most relatable. Sarah Michelle completely delivers this episode and goes through a range of emotion on par with the body. When she finds Angel at his moody vampire den, she says, "Was I not good?" This is her Ralph Wiggum heartbreak moment. Also, disclosure that I never got the full-on Angel love. Up until this episode, I was always wondering why she chose the most boring, vanilla vampire dude. Then this one comes along and he completely redeems himself.
I feel just fine.
Part 1 of Becoming also gave him more of the edge that I needed to actually like his character. Revisiting it now, I'll be honest, he's probably one of my favorite male characters. Riley will always be last. He gives me the Wiggins. Getting back on track now. This is sort of real life teen horror, right? The ultimate nightmare that the guy you love slept with you, took your virginity, and then laughed in your face. While we all know this isn't the Angel that we've come to know and love, but is instead Angelus, who has turned after experiencing one pure moment of happiness. When fans first saw this episode, the chain of events was shocking. I remember people talking about it at school the next day. Angel's a bad guy now? But David Boreanaz is still so super hot. I think people thought Angel would be back to his normal self by the end of the episode. Instead, we got the treat of Boreanaz playing the baddie and Buffy showing how badass she is with any weapon. In this case, a grenade launcher. Side note, I love the interaction between Willow and Oz in the van, as well as the conversation between Giles and Buffy at the end of the episode. Big dad feels. With over 7 seasons, there's gotta be a favorite for you all as well, so please share in the comments. Maybe you like bad eggs. I like Ted, so sue me. Alright, where can you watch this? If you have a Hulu sub, it's all there. You could also have any of the seasons on DVD or the entire box set. If you're me, you only have seasons 1 and 6, a butt ton of comics, and an annual quote along of the movie by yourself. So, what happened? Where did it all end? If you've watched season 7, then maybe you think it should have wrapped up a little earlier? Maybe before season 7? I guess it depends on the person. You gotta admire the shows that know when to call it quits, even though you will likely be left whining about it for the rest of your life. Lost. Okay, anyway. Sarah Michelle Gellar was pretty much done with doing the show. She felt like season 7 was a natural end of the series. Though we could have a debate what the more natural ending was, but we won't. Whedon and Gellar talked it out, and without Gellar, there's not much of a point to continue. Buffy fans had Angel, but only about until 2004 when the show ended. As I mentioned before, there was supposed to be an animated series, but that got scrapped as no one wanted to pick it up. The show finally got a continuation in comic book form from Dark Horse in 2007. I was super excited by it when I found out it was coming back and bought every comic up to 31. Brian K. Vaughan, who I had already adored from Runaways, picked up writing some of the storylines, as well as Buffy series regulars Drew Goddard, Jane Epinson, and Drew Greenberg, to name a few. It was a great continuation of the series, especially since some of the old crew, as well as Joss, was on it. But I kind of eventually gave up. Tons of Buffyverse ideas were thrown around, like movies for Spike and Angel, Slayer School, Ripper, the Giles made-for-TV movie, Faith the Vampire Slayer, and at some point, there was supposed to be a reboot in 2018 with a new Slayer. This also has never happened. However, news came yesterday that Boom Studios would be starting a new comic series called The Vampire Slayer. Surprise! It's a reboot with Buffy. I'm honestly more interested in Buffy the Last Vampire Slayer, which centers on a 50-year-old Buffy. There's lots of Buffy to go around if you're looking for it. RPGs, books, video games, board games, and if you plow through all that, then maybe try the scholarly papers. If you plow through that, then you've successfully closed the hellmouth underneath your old high school's library. Congratulations! Buffy left her mark in pop culture. It changed the way we look at episode formatting, dialogue, and how we as viewers watch television ourselves. Shows like Lost, Supernatural, Dead Like Me, Gilmore Girls, Once Upon a Time, Veronica Mars, and many others owe Buffy for paving the path. Real talk. Look, I'm not an expert in this thing we call life. I'm a person with flaws, still growing, and will likely continue to fall and grow the rest of my existence. I do know that art at times comes with controversy. Sometimes it's not pretty. The people we thought should be held on a pedestal are at times, well, icky, as Buffy might say. Right now, we're at this point where we're trying to navigate our feelings with the things we loved in the past. Did Joss Whedon create Buffy? Yeah, he did. But in this gal's humble opinion, Buffy became so much more than just Joss. I'm just one fan, but Buffy for me was finding out how much I really love kick-ass female protagonists, being comfortable with my weirdness, and the idea that friends can also be your family. You may also ask your friend and Buffy life mate if she wants to do a Buffy podcast like once a year. She will say yes, but it will forever be a pipe dream. Hey Marsh, this is my ask for the year. All this to say, do I miss Buffy? Sure. Luckily there's enough of that I don't have to miss it too much. Thanks for joining me on this journey through Sunnydale. Until next Slayer Fest.
In the age we live in now, comic book movies are mostly big, bloated blockbusters with big budget bullshit behind it. And while there are some exceptions to that statement these days, back in the late 90s, you would never find a comic book movie with a budget in the hundreds of millions. These kinds of films were dark horses in Hollywood with unproven success to secure studio backing. So bloated bullshit blockbusters were not an option.
Yeah! I'm gonna be naughty.
Now, there's probably no need for me to explain the early days of Marvel movies and the constant state of financial decay that the company was in prior to the inception of the MCU. But suffice it to say that Marvel, the juggernaut movie studio that now owns their own corner of the industry, was once so broke that they sold off the rights to some of their characters and IP to stay afloat. This is how we got movies like Spider-Man from Sony, The Punisher from Artisan, and of course the X-Men saga from Fox. Included in that offload of IP was Blade, which was sold to New Line Cinema, a movie that many did not know was even tied to the otherwise colorful and bright Marvel brand, and that, in the 90s, was actually to this film's benefit.
The world you live in is just a sugar-coated topping. There is another world beneath it.
Blade is a half-human and half-vampire hybrid whose mother was attacked by a vampire during childbirth. This gives Blade the unique cocktail of DNA which gives him all the strengths of these blood-sucking cultists, but none of their weaknesses. It's called being a daywalker in this movie.
All our strengths, none of our weaknesses.
Blade's mission in life is to use his curse in order to hunt and destroy any creature that he can find. He achieves this with the help of his trusty mentor, Whistler, played by Chris Christopherson, who adopted Blade as a teenager and trained him in combat. Whistler is Blade's guy in the chair who provides technical savvy, companionship, and a special serum that Blade injects to keep him from craving blood. Remember, he is a vampire after all, folks.
You tell him it's open season on all suckheads.
Now, seeing as this movie is almost 30 years old, and this is a revisited video, it's safe to assume that you've already seen this movie, and personally, I'm not really interested in recapping the entire plot and calling it a day. Instead, let's just go over the good stuff. How does this movie hold up, and what makes it great after all these years? Oh, and also, we're definitely gonna spoil some Deadpool and Wolverine somewhere in this video, so I'll warn you when we get there. Let's go.
But it's daytime!
First off, let's talk about this movie's legendary opening scene. The movie opens on what appears to be an incredibly stylized late 90s rave, complete with shiny leather, edgy music, sexiness, debauchery, and, oh yeah, blood raining from the ceiling sprinklers. That's right, dudes, this opening scene is a mass killing in a vampire rave. This is so 90s, but it is the smoothest and most satisfying 90s. The blue tones of the lighting and the color grading really pop against the deep, thick red of the corn syrup being sprayed all over the dance floor. I am so here for this. The villain of the piece is a ruthless and reckless vampire with something to prove called Deacon Frost, played by Stephen Dorff. This guy is basically seeking to either capture Blade and use his hybrid blood to push the evolutionary scale of vampires to the next level, or collab with Blade so that he doesn't have to use force. Well, Blade prefers using force, so now we have our main conflict.
Looks like your mascara's running.
This movie's performances are not only good, but I think it gets undersold just how important these actors and their commitments to the roles were in the ultimate success of this movie. It's important to remember that while Marvel films are commonplace and household movies today, Blade was made at a time when superhero movies were deeply uncool, and thus unprofitable. Director Stephen Norrington was already facing slim odds of a commercial success when taking on this project, but thanks to the cast and crew taking the project so seriously, and the actors truly committing to the absurdity of it all and delivering serious and grounded performances, is what makes this movie special.
And if you want to survive it, you better learn to pull the trigger.
Wesley Snipes' Blade is really one of those all-time superhero castings that we put up there with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine or RDJ as Iron Man. Snipes gives Blade a hip and cool edge by cracking the occasional joke, reacting with his extremely expressive orange eyes, and even throwing some signature one-liners into the mix from time to time. You know which one I'm talking about.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
While there are one or two moments of comedic relief in the film, the movie ultimately plays it completely straight and takes what it's doing pretty seriously. Dorff as Deacon Frost is a great example of hamming it up while still selling the stakes of the scene. He chews pretty much the entire set, but it's not wasted on big monologues and cheesy exposition. Instead, he lets his demeanor and expressions show you how evil and unpredictable he is, while also delivering lines as if he'd been up all night practicing in the mirror and thinking of nothing other than his mission. And I mean all of this as a compliment.
Which means a lot to me, by the way, really.
Frost gets a bad rap due to the film's dated CGI, which was heavily relied on for the ending of the movie. Why does Frost take the hit for this? Well, he's the guy who turns into this pixelated, rubbery disaster in the final act. Admittedly, this does not look as polished as it would today, but putting that aside, look at the incredible fight choreography and immaculate cinematography of the action in this movie. You know what? Montage. While the action and carnage is fun, it's also only part of a very delicious pie. The dynamic that Blade has with the supporting cast is also fun on the rewatch. Blade and Whistler have a father-son type relationship that adds a sweet layer to his character and leaves you gutted by his reaction to Whistler's almost death scene.
By the time you watch this, your friend Whistler should be dead.
To add another layer to Blade's character is his dynamic with Karen, a human that wants to help and maybe bone Blade. If Whistler makes Blade sweet, then Karen makes him tough. Her involvement gives Blade a reason to stay sharp and be alert. Cause see, while our hero has no problem going out at night to kick some vampire ass, what he's really interested in is protecting people. And with Karen being around, he's constantly looking out for her safety. It's important to note that what makes Blade a great character goes beyond the obvious. I mean, sure, the duster jacket, the ninja weapons, especially those katanas, and the shades and tattoos sure make him look cool, but his stoic attitude with those small elements of humor and most importantly, humanity, that is what makes Blade a great character.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
Behind the scenes, Norrington and Snipes would both eventually get sick of the franchise, with Norrington passing the reins for the next film to the modern master of the macabre, Guillermo del Toro, for a sequel that is just as much fun as this one. Snipes would appear as Blade in all 3 installments of the trilogy, but reportedly would get more and more difficult to work with as the films went on. See, Snipes was so ingrained in the character of Blade that he would remain in character at all times, making him seem unapproachable and unfriendly to basically everybody on set.
Motherfucker, I'll kill you. I'll just enjoy it better.
This would lead to the films having diminishing returns and eventually fading out and being pruned to the void. Until...
oh, this is gonna be good.
For those of you that love Blade the way that I do, you must have been just as stoked as I was to see Wesley Snipes enter the frame as Blade in Marvel's latest multiverse outing, Deadpool and Wolverine. Seeing him whip out some blades and kick some ass was everything I needed to fill that blade-shaped hole in my heart. However, while I love that he was in the movie, and for a good chunk of it with plenty to do, I was disappointed by the rehashed use of a catchphrase and the not-so-subtle wink at the camera and Mahershala Ali's Blade. It just didn't feel like the character in those moments. But regardless, this movie offers a bloody, violent, action-packed, and well-performed comic book story that is sure to scratch that vampire itch that you're feeling now.
And you understand the nature of the thing. You know what it's capable of.
On the rewatch, I gotta give Blade an 8.5 out of 10. This movie rules.
It was actually, when you get to know me, I'm a fairly sentimental type of guy.